The auditorium was packed, but Juno Hale kept staring at two empty seats near the front. Her parents, Glenn and Mina, had promised they would be there. She clutched her diploma cover against her chest as graduates crossed the stage, families cheering and taking pictures. Then her phone vibrated. She expected a message saying they were proud of her. Instead, Mina had written, "Sweetheart, don't be upset. Your sister's promotion ceremony became a bigger event than we expected. We had to be here for her." Juno stared at the words, unable to breathe properly. Moments later, another family member accidentally sent her a photograph. There were her parents, smiling beside Remy beneath a giant, celebrating promotion banner. Her father held a champagne glass while her mother beamed with pride. Juno looked at the photograph, then at their empty seats. She wiped her face quickly as her name was announced. Walking onto the stage alone, she heard hundreds of people cheering for their graduates. After receiving her diploma, she turned toward the audience and smiled for the photographer. Her parents were still absent. She walked off stage holding her phone tightly. That night, she made a decision that would change everything. She would stop paying their rent. Juno left the auditorium without calling her parents. Families crowded the university lobby, laughing, hugging graduates, and taking photographs beneath banners decorated with gold lettering. She moved through them quietly, keeping her diploma tucked beneath one arm while her phone remained in her hand. Every few steps, she glanced at the photograph of Glenn and Mina celebrating Remy. Her mother was smiling. Her father was holding a champagne glass. They looked exactly like parents who had chosen to be somewhere else. Outside, Juno sat on a bench and opened her banking app. She stared at the familiar monthly transaction. $1,920 sent automatically toward her parents' apartment. For 3 years, the payment had gone out without fail. Nobody at the graduation knew that. Her parents rarely mentioned it to anyone. Juno had started paying their rent after Glenn's work hours were cut and Mina began taking fewer shifts. They had promised it would only be temporary. Juno believed them. She picked up extra weekend shifts, skipped restaurants, canceled a vacation, and kept driving an old car because replacing it would cost too much. She had never built the emergency fund she wanted. She had even delayed moving into a better apartment because she needed to keep enough money available for them. Then her phone rang. It was Mina. "Did you see the pictures?" her mother asked. "Of Remy?" "Of course." She was so happy. You should have seen her face. Juno looked at her diploma. "I saw them." Mina continued talking about how important Romy's promotion had been and how proud the whole family was. Juno listened until she finally asked, "Was my graduation important too?" There was a pause. "Of course it was," Mina said. "Then why weren't you there?" "Juno, don't start this." Glenn suddenly came onto the call. "You're making this about yourself," he said. Juno closed her eyes. "It was my graduation." "We know," Glenn replied. "But Remy needed us." Juno looked down at the diploma cover resting against her knees. Somehow, even on the day she had worked years to reach, she was still being asked to understand everyone else. "I understand," she said quietly. She ended the call before either parent could respond. For several seconds, she sat completely still. Then she opened her banking app again. Her thumb hovered over the rent payment, but she didn't cancel it. Not yet. Instead, she opened a notes app and began recording every payment she could remember. Month after month. Rent. Utilities. Emergency transfers. Groceries. Car repairs. She wanted the exact number. For the first time, Juno needed to know how much of her life had been spent keeping her parents' life running. Juno returned to her apartment and spread 3 years of bank statements across the kitchen table. Receipts, transfer records, and old notes covered the surface until there was barely any room left for her laptop. She opened a calculator and began adding everything. The rent payments came first. Then utilities. Emergency transfers. Grocery money. The car repair she had paid for when Glenn's transmission failed. Every amount she had once dismissed as helping out became part of the total. When the final number appeared on the screen, Juno stared at it. $67,000. She leaned back in her chair, unable to speak. More than $67,000 had gone from her account into her parents' household. Money she could have used for a better apartment, savings, travel, or simply a life that belonged to her. Then she noticed something unusual in her records. A recent transfer to Mina had been followed by a payment from Mina to a luxury event venue. Juno checked the date twice. It was the same week as Romy's promotion celebration. She opened the transaction details. There were several more payments: clothing, decorations, catering, and a gift. Juno's jaw tightened. She wasn't angry because her parents had celebrated Romy. Romy deserved to be celebrated. What hurt was seeing that Glenn and Mina had been willing to spend money making Romy's promotion special, while depending on Juno to keep their home running. The next afternoon, Juno drove to their apartment. Mina opened the door wearing the same earrings Juno had seen in the photograph. "Juno, what are you doing here? I need to talk to you and Dad." Glenn appeared from the living room. Behind him, a framed copy of Romy's promotion certificate occupied the most prominent spot on the wall. Juno noticed it immediately. "Nice frame," she said. Mina smiled faintly. Romy was so proud. Juno stepped inside. "Did you know my graduation was the same night?" Mina's expression changed. "Of course we knew." Juno looked at Glenn. "And you still chose Romy's ceremony?" Glenn folded his arms. "Romy needed us there." Juno nodded slowly, then looked again at the framed certificate. "And what did I need?" Neither of them answered. The silence stretched across the room. Juno waited, expecting someone to explain, to defend the decision, or even to tell her she was wrong for feeling hurt. Nothing came. She looked around the room and noticed something else. There was no photograph from her graduation anywhere. Not one. Her diploma suddenly felt heavier beneath her arm. She had spent years making sure her parents never had to feel unsupported. Yet when she needed them for one evening, they had decided someone else mattered more. Juno placed her keys on the table. "I think we need to talk about the money, too." Glenn's eyes narrowed. "What money?" Juno looked directly at him. "All of it." Juno kept her hands folded in her lap as Glenn stared at her across the living room. "What money?" he repeated. "The money I've been sending you every month." Mina sighed. "Juno, we've already talked about this. You help because you're our daughter." "I know. I'm not asking why I helped. I'm asking what you plan to do about it." Glenn shifted in his chair. "We always intended to pay you back." "When?" Neither of them answered. Juno reached into her bag and pulled out a binder. She placed it carefully on the coffee table and opened it. The first payment was 3 years ago. Mina looked at the pages. "You kept records?" "I needed to." "You're making this sound like some business arrangement," Glenn said. "No. You made it a family arrangement. I just want to understand the arrangement." She turned another page. "Rent. Utilities. Groceries. Emergency transfers. Car repairs. It's more than $67,000. Mina's face tightened. "We never asked you to sacrifice your whole life. You didn't have to ask." Every month, the payment came out automatically. Glenn pushed the binder away. "You're making us feel like criminals." Juno looked at him. "I'm trying to understand why my graduation was optional, but my rent payment wasn't." The room went silent. Mina's eyes filled with tears. "That's not fair. Neither was what happened. We have always supported you," Mina said. "We raised you, and I'm grateful for that. You're acting selfish after everything we've done." Juno swallowed. "I'm not saying you owe me for raising me. I'm saying I've been carrying a responsibility that was never supposed to become permanent." Glenn stood. "You can't abandon your own parents." Juno closed the binder. "I'm not abandoning you. I'm handing your responsibilities back to you." Mina stared at her as though she had spoken another language. "What does that mean?" "It means you'll have to handle the rent yourselves." Glenn's expression hardened. "So this is punishment because we missed one ceremony?" "No." "Then what is it?" Juno stood and picked up her bag. "It's a boundary." She walked toward the door. Behind her, Mina called, "Juno, wait." Juno stopped but didn't turn around. "Please," Mina said quietly. "We need to know what happens next." Juno looked back. "You figure it out." She stepped outside. Before she reached her car, her phone vibrated. A message from Mina appeared on the screen. "Is next month's rent still covered?" Juno stared at the words. Her thumb hovered over the keyboard. She didn't answer. Juno stared at Mina's message until the screen dimmed. She tapped it awake, read the question again, and opened her banking app. The recurring payment sat exactly where it always had, scheduled to leave her account at the beginning of the month. Her finger hovered over the cancellation button. For years, that payment had felt permanent. Juno pressed it. A confirmation appeared on the screen. She canceled the transfer and immediately moved the same $1,920 into a separate savings account. Her hands were shaking, but she didn't undo it. The following week, Mina called repeatedly. Juno ignored the first 3 calls, then finally answered. The landlord contacted us, Mina said. I figured he would. Juno, you can't seriously expect us to come up with that money. You need to handle the rent yourselves. So this is about graduation. No. Graduation made me stop pretending everything was fine. Mina's voice cracked. You're retaliating against us because we chose to support Romy. I'm not retaliating. Then what do you call this? Stopping a payment I can no longer afford to make. You've always afforded it. Because I kept giving things up. Mina went quiet. Juno softened her voice. I can help you look at cheaper apartments. I can help you organize your expenses. I can help you figure out what you can realistically afford. But I'm not paying the rent anymore. Glenn suddenly took the phone. You're unbelievable. I'm trying to be reasonable. Family doesn't keep score. Juno looked at the spreadsheet open on her laptop. Then why was I the only one keeping the family solvent? There was a long silence. You'll regret this, Glenn said. Juno closed her eyes. If I wanted revenge, I'd make this harder. I'm not doing that. Glenn hung up. Later that evening, another message appeared. It was from Romy. Can we meet? Juno hesitated before replying. Okay. Romy arrived carrying the same promotion certificate from the photograph. She placed it carefully on Juno's kitchen table and sat down. I knew you were paying their rent, she said. Juno stared at her. What? Mom and Dad told me. They said you liked helping. Juno leaned back. And you never thought that was strange? Romy looked down at the certificate. I did. Then why didn't you ask? Romy's eyes filled with tears. Because being the favorite was easier than asking why. Juno said nothing. Romy touched the edge of the certificate. They were already planning to move somewhere nicer near my new workplace. They expected you to keep paying the old apartment until they figured everything out. Juno's stomach tightened. They planned all of that? Romy nodded. And there's something else you need to know. And there's something else you need to know. Juno looked at Romy. What? Mom and Dad have been talking about moving into a nicer apartment near my new workplace. Juno's expression hardened. When? Soon. They said the current place was too small and too far away. And who was going to pay for it? Romy looked away. You. Juno gave a short, humorless laugh. Of course. They said you'd keep paying the old apartment while they worked everything out. So they had already built their plans around my money. Romy nodded. Juno leaned back in her chair. Did they ever ask you for help? No. You got a promotion bonus, didn't you? Yes. A big one. Romy nodded again. And they never asked you for any of it? No. Juno looked at the promotion certificate lying between them. The paper that had brought their parents running to Romy's celebration suddenly seemed less important than everything it had revealed. Romy swallowed. I should have said something. Why didn't you? Because I liked being the daughter they bragged about. Juno looked at her. Romy continued. You were the dependable one. The one who could handle things. I was the one they celebrated. I knew there was something wrong with that, but I didn't want to be the person who ruined it. You didn't ruin anything. I benefited from it. Juno didn't answer. Romy wiped her eyes. I'm sorry. Juno finally looked at her. You don't have to replace me. What? If you want to help Mom and Dad, do it because you choose to. Not because they taught you someone has to. Romy's face crumpled, and she covered her mouth with one hand. I don't know how to fix this. You can't fix 3 years in one conversation. I know. They sat quietly for a moment. Then Romy reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. There's another problem. Juno took it. What is this? Documents from their apartment. Juno opened the folder and scanned the first page. Her eyes stopped. What am I looking at? They borrowed money. How much? Romy shook her head. I don't know the exact total, but it's tied to the apartment. Juno looked at the paperwork again. Does my name appear anywhere? No. Juno turned another page. Her breathing slowed. So they didn't just depend on my rent. Romy shook her head. They built everything around it. Juno closed the folder. For the first time, the situation looked bigger than a missed graduation, a canceled payment, or a family argument. It was a debt they had been quietly carrying toward her future. Juno met Glenn and Mina at a diner that evening. She chose a booth near the window, placed the folder Romy had given her on the table, and waited until both parents sat down. Glenn looked irritated before he even opened the menu. You're making this much bigger than it needs to be. Juno pushed the folder toward him. Then explained the debt. Mina glanced at Glenn. We were going to handle it. When? Glenn rubbed his forehead. We thought the rent situation was stable. You mean because I was paying it? We had a plan. A plan that depended on me never stopping. Glenn's jaw tightened. Juno opened the folder. Is my name attached to any of this? No, Mina said quickly. Any loans? Any contracts? Any guarantees? No. Juno nodded. Then why did you use my payments when discussing your finances? Glenn looked away. Because they showed reliable household support, he said. Juno stared at him. You used my money as proof that you could afford your obligations. We weren't lying. You didn't tell them the money wasn't guaranteed. Glenn's silence answered for him. Juno closed the folder. You never planned for me to stop. Mina's eyes filled with tears. We thought you would keep helping. Why? Because you're our daughter. Juno looked from one parent to the other. That isn't an answer. Glenn leaned forward. You're acting like we deliberately trapped you. I'm saying you built a financial plan that only worked if I kept sacrificing. You're being heartless. Juno sat back. You recognize the version of me who paid the bills. You're meeting the version who doesn't. The table went quiet. Mina wiped her cheek. What do you want us to do? Downsize. We can't just move tomorrow. I know. That's why I'm offering to help you find something cheaper. Glenn shook his head. We're not moving because you decided to punish us. This isn't punishment. Then what is it? A consequence of living within your own income. Mina stared at her hands. We may never forgive you for this. Juno stood. You don't have to forgive me for protecting myself. She picked up her bag. I'll help you organize the expenses. I'll help you compare apartments. I'll even help you make calls. But I won't pay the rent. Glenn crossed his arms. Then we're done here. Juno looked at him for a moment. No, we're finally being honest. She turned and walked toward the diner's entrance, leaving the folder on the table between them. Behind her, Glenn called her name. Juno kept walking. By the end of the week, Glenn and Mina had involved half the family. Juno was asked to attend a gathering at her aunt's house, where everyone seemed to expect her to apologize. She arrived carrying a thick binder. The living room was crowded when she walked in. Glenn sat beside Mina on the couch. Romy was already there, looking uncomfortable. Her aunt pointed toward an empty chair. Sit down, Juno. We need to talk. Juno sat and placed the binder on the coffee table. I agree. Her uncle cleared his throat. Your parents are very hurt. I know. You stopped paying their rent without warning. I told them I was stopping. Mina shook her head. After everything we did for you. Juno opened the binder. I brought the records. Glenn's expression changed. You don't need to do this. I think I do. She placed the first statement on the table. Every rent payment. Then another. Utilities. Another. Emergency transfers. She continued placing pages down. Groceries. Car repairs. Medical expenses. Other bills. Nobody spoke. Her uncle picked up one of the statements. Is this accurate, Glenn? Glenn stared at the paper. Yes. The room became noticeably quieter. Another relative looked at Mina. Why wasn't Romy contributing? Romy answered before Mina could. Because nobody asked me to. She looked at Juno. And because I was comfortable being the favorite. Mina began crying. That's not fair. Romy's voice trembled. It is. Juno kept her hands folded. Mina looked at the binder. We always knew Juno was dependable. Juno finally looked at her. You turned dependable into disposable. Mina covered her face. Glenn leaned forward. We never meant to make her feel that way. But you did, Romy said. Glenn looked at his younger daughter. You're taking her side now? Romy shook her head. There shouldn't be sides. No one answered. Juno closed the binder. I didn't come here to embarrass anyone. I came because everyone keeps talking about what I did without talking about what happened before it. Her aunt lowered her eyes. Juno stood. My parents have to make their own financial decisions now. I'm not asking anyone else to pay their bills. I'm not asking anyone to choose between us. She picked up the binder. I just needed the truth in the room. Nobody stopped her as she walked toward the door. Behind her, Glenn remained silent. For the first time, the family couldn't call Juno selfish without also acknowledging what she had carried. Juno started her new job 2 weeks later and rented a small apartment across town. She bought furniture slowly, choosing only what she could afford without touching her savings. The place was simple, but every chair, lamp, and dish belonged to her. There was no bill waiting for her parents attached to any of it. Her diploma hung above the desk in a plain black frame. Some evenings, Juno would glance at it and remember the empty seats in the auditorium. Her relationship with Romy had changed, too. They spoke more often now. Sometimes they talked about their parents. Sometimes they talked about nothing important at all. It was awkward, but it was honest. One evening, Juno found an envelope tucked beneath her apartment door. She recognized Romy's handwriting. Inside was a photograph. Juno stared at it for several seconds. It was a picture from graduation. She stood near the stage with her diploma against her chest, the auditorium lights glowing behind her. There were hundreds of people in the background, but Juno was alone in the frame. On the back, Romy had written, "I wish I'd been there." Juno sat on the edge of her couch and cried. Not because everything had suddenly become perfect. It hadn't. Her parents had moved into a smaller apartment. Glenn still struggled with pride. Mina still had trouble accepting that Juno's money was no longer available whenever something went wrong. But Juno no longer felt responsible for making everyone comfortable. A few days later, Mina came to her apartment. Juno opened the door and found her mother standing there without a shopping bag, a stack of bills, or an anxious expression. "Can I come in?" Juno stepped aside. Mina entered slowly and looked around. "You have a nice place." "Thanks." Mina touched the back of a chair. "I like that you bought things one at a time." Juno smiled faintly. "I'm trying not to make the same mistake twice." Mina looked down. "I didn't come for money." "I know. I spent years confusing your strength with permission to demand more from you." Juno said nothing. Mina's voice became quieter. "I'm sorry." Juno looked at her mother. "Thank you for saying that." Mina swallowed. "Can we start over?" Juno looked toward the framed diploma above her desk. "We can start somewhere different." Mina nodded. Neither of them moved for a moment. Then Mina asked, "Can I sit down?" Juno pulled out a chair. "Yeah, Mom. Sit." A year after graduation, Juno had built a life that no longer depended on whether her parents approved of it. Her career was moving forward, her savings were growing, and her apartment was entirely hers. She had stopped measuring every purchase against someone else's emergency. Her relationship with Romy was slowly healing, too. They still had difficult conversations, but neither sister pretended anymore. Her parents were living in a smaller apartment and learning to manage within their means. Glenn still struggled with pride. Mina still sometimes caught herself asking questions about Juno's finances before remembering that they were no longer her concern. They weren't perfect, but the old arrangement was gone. One evening, Juno received an invitation from her parents. She stared at the envelope for several seconds, expecting a request hidden inside. Instead, it was an invitation to dinner. No financial problem, no emergency, no mention of rent, just an invitation to celebrate her. At the dinner, Glenn stood and raised his glass. "For Juno." She looked at him, surprised. He took a breath. "We taught you that being loved meant being useful. We were wrong." Mina lowered her eyes. "We treated your reliability like something we were entitled to." Juno looked at Romy, who gave her a small nod. The apology didn't erase the years behind it. Juno wasn't going to pretend that it did. But for once, there was no excuse attached to it. "Thank you," Juno said. Glenn sat down. Later that night, Juno returned home and took her graduation photograph from a drawer. She placed it beside her diploma on the desk. The woman in the photograph was crying because 2 chairs had been empty. Juno looked at the picture for a long moment. Those empty chairs had once felt like proof that she wasn't worth celebrating. Now they meant something else. They marked the moment she finally stopped paying for a place at someone else's table. Juno turned off the lamp and left the photograph beside her diploma. She hadn't ruined her parents' lives. She had simply stopped sacrificing hers to maintain theirs. And when they finally learned how to love her without needing something from her, Juno was free to decide what came next.